Everybody can see my screen? Yes? All right, great. Well, thank you so much for joining the financial service session. I hope you were able to enjoy some of the chats we had from Ali and Ben and the customer panel so far. So the purpose of this forum is to really exchange ideas, talk about themes, talk about big the trends that are happening in our industry. Again, my name is Junta Nakai. I head up the financial service business here at Databricks, and I'm joined by Elliot Knudsen, who leads solutions architects for financial services. So a little bit of housekeeping. Your connections are going to be muted, and you could submit questions via the Q&A panel. If you have a pressing question, please just raise your hand and we could unmute you as well. That's the way we're going to make it as lively as possible. And if some questions that we don't get to, we'll try to make sure to answer them and address them beyond the capacity of this forum. This session is also going to be recorded. So if there is any decks or specific slides that you wanted to listen to or see again, we'll make sure to send that to you as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of what the financial service industry team does. So as we grow as a software company, we realize that it's become incredibly important to be able to talk the talk and understand the customer's use cases and the common patterns that we're seeing. And the primary reason why our team exists is to really help accelerate the bridge or the time it takes from an ideation of a use case to the actual implementation. Because we're out there talking to customers, looking at reference architecture, see how things are being implemented so that when your organization thinks about deploying a particular use case, we'll be able to bring the best practices, the common pitfalls, and a point of view to help you accelerate that path to innovation and make it as rapid as possible. Again, my name is Shunta Nakai. I'm joined by Elliot Knudsen, who's going to be moderating the discussion. What is financial services at Databricks? I just wanted to give you guys a 10-minute overview of what we're doing in financial services. So as you know, Databricks is one of the fastest growing companies in the world today. And within that, financial service is the fastest growing vertical, or one of the fastest growing verticals that we have. We have over 400 customers around the world in financial services that are using our platform to do over 200 use cases, everything from personalized finance to risk management to fraud detection. So that's Databricks' financial service vertical in a nutshell. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the opportunities that we're currently seeing in data and AI. I certainly believe that the future of finance is going to be these three things, which is instant, inclusive, and invisible. And underpinning each and every one of these is data, and an ability to leverage the data that an organization has to unlock business value and create new customer experiences for their end users. If you think about the traditional advantages of a financial service organization in the past, arguably it fell down to two things, which is capital and scale. And when you look at the future of financial services, or what the potential winners are going to be tomorrow, I firmly believe that the most valuable assets are going to become data and your people. In other words, the ability of your people to unlock value from the as to drive this quote that everybody talks and are focused. Again, we have over 400 customers now in financial services across the world, from asset managers to investment banks to retail banks, to insurance companies, the government, and we're focused on each and every one of these. So there's tons of use cases that we're seeing here. Would love to engage with you and discuss with you what the priorities are for you and how we could potentially lean in and help. We think about financial services in these four specific segments. And in the middle, you'll see just some of the 200 use cases that are currently done on our platform. So anywhere from customer 360 to computer vision to anomaly detection. Again, there's over 200 live use cases on our platform today. But when we bucket those into specific segments and themes, it really comes down to these five things. And I would call 3 of them are more vertical use cases, and 2 of them I call more horizontal use cases. So the vertical use cases, as you see here, personalized finance. That includes customer 360, lifetime value, upsell, cross-sell, marketing analytics, next best offer, etc. Risk management is where we're probably seeing the most aggressive adoption of our platform around the world. So we have several large institutions who are running their both credit risk and market risk platform on the cloud using Databricks as the backbone of that. And the risk management use case is all about being able to get a real-time or intraday view of the risks facing your financial service organization and being able to slicing and dicing in particular ways. When people think of Databricks, they think of us as a machine learning and AI platform, which is absolutely the case. But I would say in financial services, a lot of the use cases around data and compute. Not necessarily AI, but so distributing Monte Carlo simulations at scale, for example, compute intensive workflows that help really the day-to-day operations of financial service company. Fraud detection, pretty self-explanatory, but probably the most advanced use of machine learning in financial services and in the fraud space today. And the two other horizontal ones are what I call alternative and third-party data, which is a huge theme today, which encompasses things like ESG, environmental social governance, that your organization is probably very focused on as well. But this is about using a broader array of data sets, both structured and unstructured, to aid decision-making at your organization. And finally, model delivery. Model delivery is something that resonates extremely well with our customers. This is all about how do we accelerate the model development lifecycle in a financial service organizations. We are keenly aware that in financial services, it takes much, much longer to productionize any model, forget machine learning, but any model compared to other industries. And the open source capabilities that Databricks provides makes it much easier to actually, and much faster to be able to develop models and also to explain them at every step of the way. And we could talk a little bit more about in this discussion. So the data analytics platform is all about bringing all your data from disparate sources, providing a common or unified data set or a common source of truth, and enabling your data scientists, your data engineers, your quants, your risk managers, et cetera, to be able to collaborate and share code and achieve these business results that you see on the right. In most of financial services, it really comes down to ROE. What can we do to drive the profitability of our company and drive revenues for our company? And when you think about the composition of ROE, if you look at the DuPont equation, for example, it really comes down to three things, which is leverage, productivity, and margin. And if you look at margin and leverage, these things are either are capped for regulatory purposes, but also on the margin side, most financial service institutions are as profitable they've ever been, ever, if you look at their net margins, for example. So what really comes down to is the productivity piece. How do we enhance the productivity of our employees to leverage the data that we have to drive superior business decisions? And that's where we come in as an organization. And before I hand it off to Eli, I just wanted to touch about two things, what I call the curves of data. And I come from a Wall Street background myself, and I like to think of things in a very sort of supply-demand asset class type of prism. But where this is kind of the way I view how Databricks fits into this ecosystem is today you have a gap between the supply of data and the demand for data. Meaning, if you look at the past few years, the supply of data has grown exponentially at all of our customers, but the demand for it, meaning the ability for your employees to access and leverage that data, has not kept up. And as a result, you have this big gap between the supply of data and the demand for data. And that's why there's relatively low business impact that you see from this data-driven transformation. And where we fit in is to really help shift that demand curve up. So leveraging the open source tools like Delta Lake and Spark, we help to make the supply of data that you have usable and clean and reliable, but also using open source tools like Koala's ML Flow, we help you reach that supply of data at a much more optimal level. And when the demand for data and supply of data meet at a much higher level, that's where the business value is unlocked. The other way to think about it is a sort of different curve. And this is something where we spend a lot of time thinking about is how do we bridge that gap between ideation and production, specifically in financial services. We hear from our customers that on average for incumbent financial service institution, it takes roughly about 12 months to implement any model, forget machine learning or non-machine learning, but that's the pace it takes from model creation, validation, audit, et cetera. And then these processes that are very unique to financial services. And where Databricks comes in, using the open source tools that we talked about, and we could act upon this and talk about this a little more, is to really help you shorten that gap between the model development to the actual implementation. And because this curve shows that the impact that your model or your business use case has falls dramatically with time. Right. So the quicker that you could implement this, the more relevant it could be to a rapidly changing scenario like we have today, or be much more aligned with, for example, CEO initiatives of today versus what the CEO's initiative or priorities might be 12 months from now or 18 months from now. The last thing I just want to talk very briefly is Solution Accelerators. So Solution Accelerator is a program that we created where it's a set of technical capabilities, notebooks, demos, training, education material, expertise, where we can come help your organization implement use cases as quickly as possible. And we focused on 3 so far, which is modernizing risk management on the cloud. This is for financial and non-financial risk, how to build models quickly and explainable models quickly in financial services, and computer vision for claims assessment. And as we move on for the next few quarters, there's 3 things that we're going to be really focused on, which is around ESG, operational risk, and using machine learning to quantify the data quality. And this is something that comes off often in our customer base today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Elliot.
Thanks, Junta. And thanks everyone for joining us in this roundtable. So just a quick intro on myself. I'm Elliot. I lead an organization at Databricks that is a technical organization that delivers solutions primarily to bulge bracket banks, right? Although I also cover some asset managers and credit card companies as well. And really the purpose of this session is to have a discussion and to have a roundtable. I think we had a really fantastic session with Ali in the morning where he laid out the trends, and Ben Horowitz obviously is a phenomenal speaker. But I think that what we're hoping that folks get from here is to just a sharing of ideas as different practitioners within financial services. So what I thought might be helpful is to just walk through, when I talk with my clients, a couple of the core questions that I get asked and conversations that I have with them to get folks started. But as we go through, if you could please feel free to raise your hand or put questions in chat. I'm also happy to answer those questions as well. But I wanted to walk through a couple just to get people thinking. So the first has to do with data across the clouds, right? So as Ali mentioned this morning, we see folks going multi-cloud now at a much greater rate than we did earlier. And within financial services, oftentimes that's one cloud, right? As banks get used to just putting their data in the cloud to begin with. But more and more, this has to do with internal data sources combining with external data sources. If you're getting data from a Bloomberg or a Thomson Reuters Refinitiv, how do you pull that data in? Often that data is now being pulled from one cloud environment to another cloud environment, and then even within a company, right, sharing data effectively. This is something that we're really talking and architecting with our clients. The second, if you could go to the second is something that is a very interesting observation that we've had, which is especially within financial services, there are a lot of questions around when new applications are coming out to whether to take a greenfield strategy or to take a legacy strategy. When, for instance, the Apple Card launched, Goldman very explicitly said, one of our competitive advantages is that we have not been in the credit card business before. We don't need to support these types of applications. But then you're building from no scale. You're starting from scratch. Versus when you go into a business when you already have an enormous amount of scale, but you also have this legacy burden. So this is something that our clients are also coming to us with and saying, hey, given our strategy, what are some of the needs and concerns, and how can you address them? The third is often a regulatory burden. In particular with these greenfield applications, folks are really looking to have AI or have ML or a more data-driven approach. And most of the time, that regulatory burden really has to do with the governance model, right? How do you ensure that you have proper data access? How do you ensure that you have a good automation process, for putting models into production? We have Antoine on the call who has enormous amount of experience here. The fourth is one that I'm personally most excited about. So at Databricks, we've grown very, very quickly as an organization. I spend about 50% of my time personally just recruiting. So I like to say that I moonlight as a full-time recruiter. But really, when it comes to building these organizations that are architecture organization that have the right architecture, that can build these new types of products or can scale existing BI and reporting over very, very large teams, it has to do with attracting the right people and then building the right teams and the right culture. And I thought Ben's fireside was fantastic as it relates to that. And then finally, one thing that of course has been on a lot of people's minds are is the current economic environment. And there's this really fantastic blog post I read recently from Jeff Immelt, and he said, when he was going through the 2008 financial crisis with GE, he had to do two things simultaneously. He had to both consider the worst case scenarios. He had to do budgeting and really do the financial forecasting that made sure that they were that GE at the time was in a solid place from a dealing with some of these worst case scenarios, while at the same time noting that when you have volatility, that also creates enormous amounts of opportunity. So how do you move quickly to take advantage of that opportunity while at the same time, covering your bases and making sure that your business is in a good place to be able, with the right levels of cash and with the right, with the right staffing to be able to survive, economic downturns. So these are just a couple, that have come across. But I'd be very curious if other folks have other chats or if they have thoughts on these, as they've seen their organizations. I just wanted to open it up now.
And I realize that the Q&A feature may be disabled. So if you have a question, please just raise your hand and I could unmute you so that you could ask that question. So that should be, I believe, on the bottom of your screen, the panel to be able to raise your hand and I could unmute you. And as we wait for people to do that, I guess this is a question is a great segue for Antoine. Antoine is the technical director of financial services. I would love to have him just talk briefly about what I talked about before, which is how do you actually accelerate the model development cycle using open source tools in a platform like Databricks?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Jonathan, Elliot. So briefly, before joining Databricks, I was leading an AI practice for a large financial institution in the UK. So really by leading that practice, it was about delivering model faster, building that team, building that culture, accessing data quicker. So when we mentioned the use of alternative data and the cost it is to bring a new sets of data to explore new insights in production, will take a long time. So it's really about reducing that time it takes from an idea to effectively experimenting and then delivering. But from an exploration to a production software that can run in an organization business as usual, there may be some steps, there may be some safeguards, such as your data governance team, your IT governance. There may be some regulation aspects, regulatory aspect. You're not allowed to use that feature or this feature, not allowed to use this model or that model. How do you make sure that your model will not be breaking anything in the bank? So those are the kind of challenges and burden that comes with data and AI in a bank that can be addressed really drastically with the use of Databricks as a way to have a more structured and transparent approach. So just speaking from experience, there is always this kind of model explainability. We cannot go to production because our model is not explainable. But if the approach itself is not explainable, we don't really care at this point about the model, whether we use a black box or not. If we're not even able to really articulate the approach that we are using with our data, why do we decide to use what feature for what purpose? What is the business problem that we are trying to solve? And really capturing all those kind of evidence that will make your model validation easier on the long run. So it's really bringing those kind of core foundation as accelerators to commercial data science, and not just state-of-the-art AI, but really about solving a business problem through data and capturing those evidence as one unified interface. And this is the reason that selfishly I decided to join really Databricks on that kind of mission statement. So I don't know if that resonates with you all.
So again, if you have any questions, please do hit the raise my hand button, and I could make sure to put that, make sure that you can ask your question. All right. As we wait for that, in case people are shy, I'm going to start reading some of the questions that people submitted ahead of time, and perhaps Elliot and Antoine will get to address them. The first one is, you touched on this, is about reproducibility and repeatability. These two things are paramount with respect to machine learning and AI. What advances do you see moving forward to make that a reality, particularly for computer scientists that are not trained as data scientists or statisticians?
Yeah, here, Antoine, maybe I can take a stab at that, and I'd be then I'd love your perspective. So this actually goes back to something that Ollie was saying this morning, which is there's a real need that folks have now around end-to-end ML systems. And one of the reasons that the end-to-end component is so critical has to do with that level of reproducibility. And really having, you know, a system that can then go back and provide the auditability and all of the explainability is a requirement, right? And that's why folks are moving from a best of breed approach, where they can find, you know, the best automation tools here, the best serving tools there, to an approach where they're trying to really just get an all-in-one platform. Now, there's sort of this interesting thing that you want, this reproducibility at the model level, but then you also want the ability to do time travel at the data level. So you want to be able to rematerialize the data at any given point in time, and that, as a key technology, really enables like the full set of these auditability features that folks are looking for. So what we're seeing is that the reproducibility requirements aren't just a requirement at the model level and at the the ML level, but people are also looking at lots of different data management tools from that perspective as well, whether it's governance tools like a Calibra, right, that have different workflows in them, or whether it's leveraging capabilities within, say, Databricks Delta in order to do time travel back to a specific point in time.
That's great. Yeah, makes perfect sense, Elliot. If I just put my 2 cents worth, you're absolutely right. There is the reproducibility in terms of the model, the reproducibility in terms of data, the reproducibility in terms of environment. So it's really having code that you can trust, having data that you can trust, having binary or insights that you can trust. Something that really resonates with me, really from experience, is answering simple questions such as how many active customers do you have in your company. Those kind of questions that are really paramount to a successful data science delivery. So solving those foundations and being able to log that delta version to these specific experiments that will drive this insights delivery. So yeah, that's really really interesting how the industry is now moving to more commercial data science, when a few years ago it was really about interesting insights on a laptop, to now being able to drive like to take data-driven decision you can trust.
Awesome, thanks. Next question. And again, I'm going to start reading off the questions that are submitted. Please raise your hand if you have a question, or if you have any counterpoints, or if you disagree. But the next one was submitted earlier. How does Databricks work with Snowflake and other data warehouses? Call-outs, watch-outs, question mark.
That's another great question. So yeah, I mean, this really has to do with how these systems get architected, right? And you know, we have this lakehouse paradigm, right? Where we believe that there's a set of sort of requirements, right, that are not properly addressed with both the current data lakes as well as the data warehouses. However, you know, we're all sort of practical here. So in basically for all of my clients, they are moving forward with a combined approach of having data warehouses, you know, in the cloud, things like Snowflake or Redshift, and having that be co-designed and interoperable with their Delta Lake technologies. Usually distributed storage, right? You know, data that's sitting on top of S3 because it's too expensive to put into a data warehouse, as well as the various compute and access systems on top of that, right? So tools like Databricks, you know, tools like Athena, et cetera. So where we see the really important areas for folks to get right, and this is not specific to financial services, but is making sure that the data architecture is done correctly, and making sure that basically the right data sets with the right governance is placed in the right places. So usually what that means is folks are building, you know, their significant ETL footprint that leverages primarily scale out distributed storage like S3, right, or ADLS Gen 2, with scale out compute, right? You know, EC2 boxes and Azure VMs or VMs on GCP, and the process that they go through is that they will make sure that they take those data lake tables and really refine those down to get to a golden copy that's then inside of their distributed storage. And then only once they get to that golden copy, then they put that into, you know, a data warehouse as a serving layer. So the really critical piece for our clients is to make sure that they design those systems effectively upfront, because often if they're not designed correctly, they incur pretty significant technical debt that they then need to go and re-architect and remove their data and reshuffle it around at a later point in time.
Thanks, Elliot. The next one I wanted to touch on was the attracting talent part that you talked about. And this is also near and dear to my heart, because I'm increasingly seeing our customers put Databricks and in their job descriptions as they post for new jobs. And I think that's incredible, and using the platform as a tool to attract talent as well. And maybe this is more of a question for Antoine, given that you've led pretty significant data and AI practices at big organizations. But you know, what's the difficulty, or how do you approach attracting machine learning or data science talent to an organization? And more importantly, what does it take to retain these talented individuals, given the sort of the options that people have today?
That's a really, really interesting question. So I think on the attracting talents, financial services are in a quite good position to get some really great name. People would knock at your door to just go and work with you. but it needs to be really followed with a long-term data vision. So it's really, I think we can attract a lot of really great talent, but retaining them is really, really difficult when it comes to doing your job business as usual. The reason being that, as we alluded before, when it takes 12 months to deliver a model, those kind of new type of fresh grad profiles, they really are passionate. They really want to really change the industry, to drive things forward. And they will just lose faith really in data science, in commercial data science, if they're not able to get the impact that they were looking at. So it's really showing this short-term deliverable with a longer-term strategy, transforming financial services with small steps, small deliverables that are actionable, quantifiable, and really building that kind of culture around failing fast, exploring, and delivering something and moving on. So I've seen really that from two angles. I've really seen data scientists losing faith. I've seen data scientists who were aiming for too big and therefore were not really able to deliver something short term. But I had interestingly, the longest records of retaining talent in my team, because I managed to keep my team alive for a year. So that gives you an idea of how easy it was to attract talent and how difficult it is to retain them, to satisfy their data appetite with a really long-term vision.
That's great. 1 year is the I guess that's the benchmark.
Let me maybe add one or two things there. I mean, one of the sort of interesting things that I have noticed is you need to have the team that matches the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're trying to build a greenfield product, you probably want software engineers, right? You probably want some level, like some deep software engineering skill sets that can run and build automated systems at scale, right? If your problems are being able to effectively communicate the value of the problems that you're facing and the value of your ML, you know, of your ML projects, right? Often bringing in folks that have consulting background can really help with that. But I think that too often folks just fall into the, oh, we need to hire data scientists without sort of thinking deeply around, you know, the specific success criteria of the person responsible and of the project overall.
Thanks, Elliot. And as I mentioned, I love seeing Databricks being posted in job descriptions. But one I really encourage you to look at is a customer of ours called Esure in the UK, their insurance company. And if you go to their job board, one of my best quotes that I see there is, you know, not only will we give you access to the latest tools like Databricks, it says you can actually access the data. Which is the second part of how important for a data scientist to be engaged and interested in the work is just access to data, which obviously in financial services can be a little bit difficult. The next question, and this is perhaps more for me, but what is an example of an industry within financial services that hasn't been disrupted yet? That's a really interesting question, because I'd argue that almost nothing has been disrupted yet. I mean, if you look at the change in financial services over the last 10 years, or how individuals interact with money specifically over the last 10 years, the only real innovation that I see is free equity trading, right? So people used to pay $7 or $8 or even $10 to trade stock each time. And today they don't pay anything. They use Robinhood and they're monetizing on the back end. But other than that, the way in which you interact or customers interact with money has barely changed over the past 10 years. But that being said, I would say the power base, or meaning what constitutes a financial service institution, has shifted pretty dramatically over that 10-year time frame. So for example, when you think, if someone asks you, what is the largest financial service institution in America by market cap, I'd imagine that most people here would say JP Morgan, but it's not true. right? The biggest financial service institution on earth by a wide margin is Visa by market cap. When you think about, so PayPal, right? PayPal has added roughly $70 billion of market cap year to date. That's almost as big as Goldman Sachs' entire market cap, right? So you see the shift in who constitutes a financial service institution. And this goes in with what I said before of being able to use the data that you have, becoming a platform, et cetera, to really help unlock new experiences and new value for an organization. Where I see the most potential disruption go forward, I would kind of go in two areas. One is around insurance, where insurance, interestingly enough, is probably the fastest growing subvertical within financial services at Databricks. So we see a lot of insurance companies coming to our platform recently, but there's still a gap between what I would say is the most high value uses of AI and ML, which I would argue is underwriting, and the actual implementation of AI. So even though underwriting is probably the highest value, it's the lowest on the list of actual implementation. So there's a little bit of catch up there, but we continue to see a lot of insurance companies doing innovative things, and I think that area will be disrupted quite significantly over the next few years. Another area is about interchange fees. And I think the Wall Street Journal had a great article about this a few days ago, but interchange fees are, if you don't know, is basically how much money the merchants charge or the credit card company in the network charges for a credit card swipe. So every time you spend money on a credit card, typically 2 or 3% of that doesn't go to the merchant. So the merchant only gets 97%-ish, 98% of the money. And that has not changed for decades. Right. So if you think about the compression of margins and the compressions of fees that we've seen in almost every asset class, think of equities as an example that I alluded to, you just haven't seen that in interchange fees yet. And that's in a prime area where data and more specifically fraud analytics, advanced analytics, and detecting fraud and understanding fraud can play a material impact on significantly reducing that. And there's sort of equality implications of that too, because what happens when you have interchange fees is that because merchants typically like to price things cash and credit card at the same price, you have this almost a wealth transfer between people who don't have credit cards to the people who have credit cards, because they're monetizing that opportunity on the back end through rewards. And I think that's kind of an area where those two big areas that I see a tremendous ability for disruption to happen, certainly over the next few years. So with that, I know we only have three.
George, have you become a Robinhood trader given your?
No, I'm a big believer in ETFs, so I more. But as we wrap up, I only have we only have 3 minutes left. I just wanted to point out that financial services, we're putting together a industry forum on this Thursday. It begins at 6 a.m. Pacific or 9 a.m. Eastern, and it's only an hour and a half. And this is going to be very high level, executive driven. So if you have people at your organization that are not technical, that still want to understand how people are thinking about AI and what are they doing about it, I think this is going to be a great session. So we have the chief data scientist from NASDAQ, Doug Hamilton, talking for about 30 minutes. And then Anurag Sehgal, who's the head of applied AI at Credit Suisse, talking about their vision of AI and the way they leverage data and they think about the future going forward. So I think it's going to be a great session for your sort of less technical folk who are still interested in what's happening in the world of data and AI. Again, this is going to be Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, which I believe is also 2 p.m. London time if you have folks over there. And finally, thank you very much for joining our session today. Your feedback is very important for us. This is the first time we've done a virtual event. Hopefully next time we do this, we'll be able to meet live in San Francisco or in Berlin or somewhere where we do the next one. But please tell us the feedback and how we could improve and how we could change things to get more value out of these sessions. And with that, thank you very much for joining. We're going to have a short break, but then we have I think a wonderful second half to the session going back to the executive forum. So we will see you there shortly.